I'm falling for you now. Yeah, falling for you now. And I'm falling for you now. Ooh, I'm falling for you now. I've been floating like head in the clouds. You're the one I see, the face in the crowd, and I'm falling for you now. Hey, falling for you now.
Ian, can you grab a water real quick?
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. I can speak loudly, but I don't think I hear the mic. Am I good? How about this time? I think this mic got all the power from that mic. Good morning on a beautiful, beautiful fall day in Exeter, New Hampshire. The sun is shining. All the people from out of town I've been talking to have been telling me they want to move here because it's so nice. Every day is not always this beautiful, but today we have sunny skies, leaves are turning colors, very nice. On behalf of Seacoast Online and the USA Today Network, welcome to our Presidential Town Hall from Exeter, New Hampshire with Vivek Ramaswamy. That's right. You can applaud. Special welcome to the huge turnout from Phillips Exeter Academy, students and parents. Thank you for being here. I I'm Howard Altschuler, Executive Editor of Seacoast Media Group, and in New Hampshire we publish the Exeter Newsletter, Hampton Union, Portsmouth Herald, Foster's Daily Democrat, the website Seacoast Online, and fosters.com. For those of you who may not be familiar, New Hampshire presidential town halls, and this space in particular, are steeped in history. Abraham Lincoln, the first Republican president, spoke to crowds in this very spot in March 1860, shortly before launching his historic presidential campaign. More recently, we've seen Bob Dole, John McCain, Mitt Romney, Donald Trump have all spoken in this spot. Why Exeter? Exeter has a claim to being a birthplace of the Republican Party. Amos Tuck, who served in Congress with Lincoln, was from Exeter, and 170 years ago this month, he brought together a group of political leaders who wanted to stop the spread of slavery in new states, and they began doing the hard work of creating a new political party. The the New Hampshire primary itself, it just celebrated its 100th anniversary in 2020. In the first primary in 1920, grew out of a reform effort across the country that brought us the women's right to vote, brought the direct election of U.S. senators, and to some mixed reviews, prohibition. But it was a very historic time in American history. New Hampshire's first in the primary has endured for more than 100 years because it works. No amount of television ads, direct mail, or what today passes for a political debate on television can pass and be more powerful than a one-on-one conversation between a voter and a candidate who truly listens and understands. So today, this is your opportunity to ask the questions that are on your mind and on your heart, and I know our special guest is going to be happy to address whatever questions you have. All honest questions are good questions. We ask that this morning's conversation be civil and substantive. Let's show the world democracy done right. On your seat, you'll have seen there was a survey card. Please fill it out to let us know what issues are most important to you. I promise you we'll read them, and it'll help inform our political coverage as we move forward into the 2024 campaign season. And I always have to remind myself of this, please remember to silence your cell phones. And now to introduce this morning's special guest, and to moderate today's conversation, let me introduce you to my colleague, Pulitzer Prize-winning, USA Today national political correspondent, Philip M. Bailey.
Thank you. There you go. There you go. Thank you, everyone, for joining us here. Again, I'm Philip M. Bailey, national political correspondent at USA Today. I'm the moderator, but really, I'm just helping you all out, right? As Howard said, a few quick instructions. Please silence those cell phones. We don't want you to be beeping and booping and bopping, right? Number two, when you raise your hand and Mr. Ramaswamy calls on you, just give us maybe 3 to 5 seconds for one of our runners with these microphones to get to you. Then say your name and where you're from, right? Very important note here. Mr. Ramaswamy is applying for a job, right? You're the boss of that job. President of the United States. So I want you to feel empowered to ask the questions here. We're just here to simply help you and guide you along this process. So if anybody has made a splash in this 2024 campaign, I would think Vivek Ramaswamy has done that. He wears many different hats. He's a biotech engineer with a biology degree from Harvard, a law degree from Yale. He was a heck of a tennis player, I hear. And by the way, someone told me he was a rapper. Without further ado, Mr. Vivek Ramaswamy.
Welcome. Good to see you. Good to see you. Good to be here. Yeah.
Good to be here. Thank you. I'm excited. So I'm going to kick this off with a few words. I want to thank you all for being here on a Saturday morning. This reminds why we do it first here in New Hampshire. We're going to keep it this way because I'll be very frank. I come from outside the world of politics. I'm a businessman, not a politician. And if you asked me a few years ago, even last year, does it matter which state goes first in the primary process? I said, well, what does it matter one way or another? I am now a first-in-the-nation primary evangelist because there's no social media algorithms in the air between us this morning. There's no TV screens between us this morning. It's just us having an open conversation as citizens. I'll tell you a bit about myself since most of you probably don't know me directly. My parents came to this country 40 years ago with almost no money. In a single generation, I have gone on to found multiple multi-billion-dollar companies, and I did it while marrying my wife, Apoorva, who is in New Hampshire with our 2 sons today, who we're raising in Ohio, following our faith in God, putting an emphasis on education. That is the American dream. And I am genuinely worried that that American dream will not exist for our 2 sons and their generation unless we all do something about it. We're in the middle of a kind of war in the United States of America. It's not a war between black and white, as the media might teach you to believe. It is not even a war between Democrats and Republicans, not really. It is a war between the majority of us, and I truly believe it's the overwhelming majority of us, who believe in the founding ideals of this country, that all men are created equal, that you get ahead in this country not on the color of your skin, but on the content of your character and your contributions, who believe in free speech and open debate, the kind of conversation we're having this morning, that you get to speak your mind in the open, and you do too, as long as I get to in return, who believe these ideals are exceptional, who believe American exceptionalism is real, that we don't apologize for it, that even though we are an imperfect nation, we're still founded on the pursuit of a more perfect union, the pursuit of liberty, equality, and justice for all. That is most of us on one side of this war. And on the other side, we have a fringe minority who says your identity is based on your race, your gender, and your sexuality. That if you're black, you're disadvantaged. That if you're white, you're privileged. That we have to stop burning carbon in the United States, even as we shift those same carbon emissions to places like China. That it's okay to use our military to protect somebody else's border, but not our own border here at home. And the point I want to make in kicking this off today is to share with you my view that the reason I call this a war is that there is no middle ground between these views. Either you believe in meritocracy or you believe in group quotas. Either you believe in American exceptionalism or you believe in American apologism. You can't have both of those things at the same time. And the good news that I have to share with you, now 9 months into this campaign, I have been across this country. I can share with you with conviction that 80+% of us in the United States, black or white, red or blue, are on the pro-American side of this war. And even better news is half the 20% are people younger than me who never learned those ideals in the first place. We're going to bring them along too. But the bad news is that the other side, that fringe minority, is still winning this war. The story of why is long and complicated. We may get through it in some of our questions and answers, but one of the reasons why is that we have tamed our culture of free speech in this country. And I'll close off my opening with this. Do you want to know the best measure of the health of American democracy? Here's what it is. It isn't the number of green pieces of paper in our bank accounts. That's important, but it's not the most important thing. It isn't the number of ballots we cast every November. That's important, but it's just the final act at the end of a process. The most important measure of the health of American democracy is the percentage of people who feel free to say what they actually think in public. Right now, we're doing poorly. The only way we're going to do better is all of us, not just me, all of us starting to speak openly again. That's what we're doing this morning. And I think that this is a generational issue for me. This is personal. I'm the youngest person ever to run for U.S. president as a Republican. And the thing about my generation is that we grew up into 10, 20 years where we were taught to celebrate our diversity and our differences so much that we forgot all of the ways that we are all really the same as Americans, bound by that common set of ideals. I believe it deep in my bones that those ideals still exist. But we're going to have to do the hard work of rediscovering them. E pluribus unum means from many, one. That's what won the American Revolution. That's what reunited us after the Civil War. That is what won us 2 world wars and the Cold War. That is what still gives hope to the free world. And if we can revive that dream over group identity and victimhood and grievance and censorship, then nobody in the world, not a nation, not a corporation, not a virus, not China, is going to defeat us. That is what American exceptionalism is all about. And that is what we together, all of us, are going to revive to save our great nation. I'm excited to hear from you. Thank you for coming out. Let's open up the conversation to the moderator here and to the floor to all of you. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you.
And again, think about your questions in this part. Vivek, I want to ask you a really important question. You made a pretty stark opening statement. You've been in this race for 9 months. You've traveled the country. Has there been an interaction you've had with a voter or voters that has made you think differently, right? Because you're coming in this race with a lot of conviction. But has there been an interaction you've had with a voter in Iowa, Ohio, wherever you've been, right, that has made you think differently about an issue than you did previously?
Sure. I mean, it happens regularly all the time. And let me think of a good example on this. I think I had one last night. I mean, it just happens so regularly, but I'll just pick an example last night from New Hampshire, where somebody who actually came to this country as an immigrant from Ukraine challenged me on my position on Ukraine. My view is that we need to find a reasonable path to peace in Ukraine in a way that secures peace and advances American interests. But this person says, well, how can Russia be allowed to win this war? And one of the things I realized is that based on the things I was hearing from this individual, she's American through and through, but she felt like I probably hadn't communicated as effectively on my position. So the thing she had heard from me, which I've said in the past, in 30-second forums on a debate stage with a little buzzer at the end, you got to make your point concisely. I said, look, if we're going to use our military to protect somebody else's border halfway around the world, we should use our own military to protect our own border in this country right here at home in the United States of America. Well, I think one of the things, and I stand by that, but there's more to the story, right? And so one of the things that I shared with her is, she says, well, why do you automatically assume that Russia and Ukraine are equal? No, I think that just Putin is a craven dictator. But just because Russia is bad doesn't mean Ukraine is good or perfect. And there are complexities to this conflict that leave, even in many cases, Ukraine worse off, let alone the United States. And so we had about a 20-minute exchange in what was the photo line. There was a long line of people waiting to take the picture. But this was important to me to have that one-on-one conversation with her. And what I realized was that, you know what? She understood at least the basis for my position in a way she didn't get from watching me on a TV screen. And so the number one lesson for me that I took away, not just from that interaction, but countless like it, I have one every day. Went to UT Austin's campus 2 days ago. 1,200 college kids on a college campus. You're going to get some challenging questions as a Republican presidential candidate. That's a good thing, but every one of them were respectful. They challenged me on some of my views on climate change. They say, you think climate change is a hoax? I said, not quite. I said, climate change agenda is a hoax because we're shifting more carbon emissions to China than to the United States. That doesn't affect anything relating to do with the climate. It allows China to close the gap on the United States. We're opening up conversations that we otherwise don't have. And so my number one learning in this campaign is that we're not really as divided as we're taught to believe as a country. I truly believe that. I think most of us in this room, I don't know you all, you barely know me, we're getting to know each other today. I could venture to say right now at the start of this, most of us believe in the basic ideals like meritocracy, the pursuit of excellence, free speech and open debate, self-governance over aristocracy, the idea that we, the people, create a government accountable to us rather than the other way around. Those are the basic American founding ideals. Most of us believe that. And maybe there's a selection bias because you're here on a Saturday morning. Well, I think most of us probably also believe that our neighbors and our classmates and our colleagues and the parents of our kids' classmates also share these ideals in common. But we're not quite sure about it anymore because we don't feel free to talk about it. So that's my number one learning in this campaign. Fear has been infectious across this country. People are afraid to say in public what they will say in private. But you know what I've seen? From college campuses to events like the one we were at last night, courage can be contagious too. It just requires more of us willing to speak our minds in the open. And I am optimistic that if we do it, our best days as a country, we don't have to be in decline. Our best days can still be ahead of us. But that's not just up to me, it's up to all of us. That's where I land on that. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Please. They have microphones for you, apparently. Thank you. Thank you, young man.
Hi, I'm Nancy Stiles from Hampton. And I understand that one of your positions is to do away with the Department of Education. I am a strong believer in local control. However, I question if you did away with all of their policies as well, what assurance would I have taking a fourth grade student out of New Hampshire and moving them to Chicago, Texas, wherever else, that they would be put in the fourth grade there rather than pushed down to the third or moved up to the fifth, where they'd be socially inadequate. Can you help me with that?
And remind me your name again?
Nancy Stiles.
Nancy. Thank you, Nancy. It's a great question. And Nancy, you hit on a fundamental theme for me in this campaign. And I think it's important that you all know what you're getting with me. I don't want to pretend to be something that I'm not. And the good point about an election is you get to make a choice. There are certain people, good people, in this race that will favor incremental reform of the federal government and the bureaucracy. I'm not in that camp. I favor quantum leap change. I don't believe it is possible to incrementally reform agencies that have existed for a long time. The last good Republican president, President Trump, excellent president, put Betsy DeVos on top of the Department of Education. I know both of them. I know Betsy DeVos. She's a good person. They said reform it. Doesn't work because now the Department of Education still exists, spending more money than it ever has of our taxpayer dollars on a matter that the federal government should have nothing to do with. That's local education. So my approach is to actually take a lot of these agencies and shut them down where they should no longer exist. Take that $80 billion, send it back to parents across this country so that, and this is the part that addresses your question, every parent, whether they're here or if they move to Chicago or anywhere else, has true educational mobility for their children. So let's say you're that parent, then you show up and say, oh, they want to put you back in third grade. Well, I'm not going to your school just because I chose to buy my house here, because I am economically empowered with the $80 billion that the federal bureaucracy was previously spending through the Department of Education. We shut that down, put that money in the hands of parents across this country to send their kids to wherever they want to go to school. You're going to find a different school within the 30-mile radius of Chicago that will say that he's going to be in fourth grade right where he left off when he left Hampton, New Hampshire. So competition is the true answer here. We don't have it. We have a broken system. It's the civil rights issue of our time, I believe, that kids are trapped in the ghetto of the zip code they're born in. That's wrong. I'm also a fan of this thing we call math. Okay, so I'm going to walk you through some math here. The schools that spend the most money per student today are also the schools that deliver the poorest result per student. So I'm a business guy. I don't come from the world of politics. That to me is an opportunity. What's the opportunity here? I'll give you specific numbers in New York City. They spend $40,000 per student per year in the bad schools, but good ones will spend $20,000, $15,000 per student per year. So if a parent is moving their kid from the bad school to the good one, they're moving to a school that spends less money per student. I think the parent should be able to, in that case, take half of that difference with them. So let's do the math on that. $40,000 in the bad school, $20,000 in the good school. That difference is $20,000. Half that difference is $10,000. Put it in the account of that kid. Not only is that kid getting a better education, if that's just invested according to normal returns, and every year that kid gets that extra increment in their bank account, that kid's graduating with a $250,000 graduation gift when he graduates from college. It's not even close which is a better use of money. But the first step to getting there is taking that $80 billion wasted at the federal level, a federal Department of Education that's telling local schools you don't get that money unless you adopt toxic racial and gender ideologies. That's where it's coming from. The federal government says you don't get their money unless you do that. No, we have to shut that beast down. You have to slay the Leviathan. And that is not an incremental approach. You're right about that. If you want incrementalism, I think there's plenty of other candidates that will offer that. But my view is we have a fourth branch of government that is unconstitutional. The correct answer is shut it down and give the power and the money back to the people. Thank you, Nancy.
Parent to spend all of that money on education.
The parent would have to spend all the money on the education. That's right. That is specifically for the realm of education. That's exactly the answer. So it funds the otherwise underfunded gap that you have in school choice programs across this country. That's exactly how it would work, specifically for education. Thank you, Nancy. I appreciate it. Thank you. We'll go to the back there, and then we'll come back up front here.
Mr. Ramaswamy, thank you. You've expressed some illogical and dangerous positions just about everything under the sun, but I will only bring up a few points today.
Okay. Just be respectful of everyone, but we'll pick your favorite ones. Thank you.
Just a few years ago, we all saw firsthand the disastrous results when a ruthless capitalist, a scam artist, a showman, and a liar with no public service experience became the President of the United States. And yet we are here again. My fellow New Hampshire residents are being manipulated by showmen and Trump wannabes to win our votes. Mr. Ramaswamy, you may be a millionaire, and you may know how to avoid paying taxes by incorporating companies in Bermuda, but let's talk about your lack of job qualifications. You're not qualified to become the principal of my children's school of only 1,000 students. You're not qualified to be the select board of my town with a population of 16,000 people. And you're definitely not qualified to run for the highest office of our nation to govern 330 million Americans. Spewing nonsensical, fast-talking, empty words, interspersed with name-dropping Thomas Jefferson and George Washington, should not be misconstrued as knowledgeable. We Americans should stop thinking that rich men who fund their campaigns and manipulate us into thinking that they're smart or savvy are qualified for the presidency, to receive the codes to launch nuclear weapons, and to become the commander-in-chief of our military forces. Yes, it's coming. Mr. Ramaswamy, if we American voters, thank you, it's coming.
We'll let her finish. We'll give her a chance to finish.
Thank you.
It
Mr. Ramaswamy,
ends with a question mark, though.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, you will. If we American voters keep supporting self-promoting showmen who treat the US presidency or vice presidency as an entry-level position, then we, the American people, are to blame for the destruction of our democratic institutions. Please, your thoughts, Don.
Thank you.
Okay.
I appreciate that.
Before you answer,
I want to answer that, yeah.
I know you want to answer, and I want you to answer, but everyone, remember, everyone's in here at the same time. You can make your point, but get to the question first. Try to? Okay.
And hard questions are welcome. Just end them with the question mark is all I say. So here's what I will say. What do I hear embedded in that question? There's a fundamental skepticism of somebody who comes from outside and take as an entry-level job. That was what was in your question, which I think is a valid criticism. An entry-level job to be the US president. Let me just share with you one of my learnings in this campaign. We have an imperfect system right now, and you all face imperfect choices in that system. We were talking about this backstage. What was the #1 learning for me? This is a super PAC puppet game. It's my #1 learning coming in from the outside. You're told that candidates actually run campaigns that you fund by giving $35 contributions? Nonsense. The system is funded by not multimillionaires, multi-billionaires who use politicians in both parties, Democrat and Republican Party, as their puppets. The super PACs are a cancer on our system. So if you want to break that system, and I'll tell you, it's a law of nature. It's like a law of physics. As the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, every politician dances to the tune of their biggest donor. It's just a fact. Now, in my case, it is true. that biggest donor is me. Now, do I want a system in which only people who have had the level of success that I've had in the world of business and the American dream are the ones who are able to run for president? No. But is that better than a system where it's somebody else's billionaire puppet that's on that debate stage that actually is just uttering words handed to them by a billionaire-provided super PAC? Yes, I think that's better. And I think if we're going to address the corruption in Washington, D.C., the corruption of people, and there are other candidates in this race that fit this description, making millions of dollars off of connections in government service, afterwards, lobbying in a career using government connections. This is corruption that exists in both parties. Then yes, I do think it will take an outsider to that system coming in to break that system. One of the things that I think we need to stop apologizing for in this country is the power of capitalism. I have succeeded not in government, and I will not feign having government experience that I don't have. But the people who do have government experience, in some ways, got us into the mess that we're in today. So I think we live in a moment where it will take an outsider. Someone who comes from the outside, ideally even someone who comes from the next generation, to reach the next generation, of whom we have so many in this room today. I think it will take somebody whose best days, I hope, are still yet ahead in life, to see a country whose best days are still yet ahead in life. And I'm not name-dropping when I mention Thomas Jefferson. These are people I look up to as our founding fathers. He was 33 years old when he wrote the Declaration of Independence. I'm an old man by comparison. He invented the swivel chair while he was at it. That's the founding spirit we need to revive in this country. And in this particular moment, yes, I do think it will take an outsider to do it. Yes, I do think it will take an outsider to address our national debt. $33 trillion. We need a CEO in the White House. How does a CEO run a business? How have I run the businesses I've run? Zero-based budgeting. Don't start with last year's budget as the baseline, because last year's budget was broken by the same existing political class. And last year's budget was based on the previous year's budget, which was equally broken by the same corrupt special interest system. So I say break that system. Start with zero as the baseline, and then ask what's actually necessary. You're not going to get that type of leadership from somebody who comes from, I think, within that broken system. So you're right, you do face a choice. As I shared with Nancy earlier, if you want somebody who's going to incrementally reform the bureaucracy, the administrative state, I'm not your candidate. If you want somebody who has government experience as their qualification to be your next president, then I'm not your candidate. But if you want somebody who comes from the outside, a patriot who speaks the truth, uncaptured by the super PACs, willing to get in there and actually gut that shadow government, the corrupt swamp in Washington, D.C., but actually see the job through, as a leader from a different generation to reach the next generation, then yes, I am your candidate, and that is why I'm in this race. And the beauty of this is, A, you have the right to speak your mind, as does everybody else in this room. That's what makes America beautiful. That's what makes America great. And the part that really makes our system what it is that that choice belongs to you, not to me. And I'm grateful for the opportunity you guys have given us. So, next question. Thank you.
Well, we took some folks from this side.
Oh, we'll go right here. This gentleman right here. Yeah, please. Thank you. And then we'll go right behind you, and then we'll bring it back up here.
Okay, my question will be regarding the Palestinian situation. Now, before I ask my question, I want to set the record first for myself. I hate war situations. And secondly, I do not like politicians. If you win this...
I agree with you on the first, both counts.
If you win this election, you're going to be a politician, and probably I won't like you either.
That's fair.
All right. Now, Palestinian situation, everybody is calling it a Hamas situation, which is totally wrong. It's not Hamas, it's Palestinian situation, because Hamas is the organization which was started or created by Israel with the help of US. We had one Hitler in the history. He created the Holocaust. We have another wannabe Hitler in Israel who wanna create another Holocaust in Middle East with the Palestinian people. Now, my question to you, where do you stand here, right now, on the Palestinian situation and how this can be resolved, and what is your take on it?
I hear your view, sir.
And also one last thing is, there's one Hitler wannabe in Middle East, and other is right behind him. Guess who?
So let me just respond to that question. I know that there are diverse views on this question. I respectfully disagree with yours on this. I think it is wrong when we in the United States or in the UN or anybody else create a false equivalence between Israel defending its own homeland versus the behaviors of the terrorists who target Israel. So I reject the comparison, and I think I'll just speak candidly. You shared your view, I'm going to share mine. I think it is offensive to compare the current prime minister of Israel to Hitler. I think that is way off base, and I deeply disagree with that. That is wrong. Now, let me say something further. I say it without apology. Israel has the absolute right to defend its own homeland. I'm different from the far left that might give these criticisms of Israel. Of course, many of us in this room are. But I also want to be clear-headed about it. I absolutely stand for Israel's right to defend itself. But I also recognize the position I'm running for as President of the United States of America. And my moral obligation as the U.S. President is to American citizens. So there's a couple things I will say about that. Yes, we will stand with Israel in its right to defend its own homeland. Give diplomatic air cover. Frankly, this gentleman, we don't have to be upset at him. The UN pretty soon is going to start to effectively say the same things. We have to tell the UN that that's wrong. We have to provide Israel with diplomatic support, munitions support as needed. Further, even provide them with intelligence sharing. Get to the bottom of that intelligence failure, frankly, both in the US and Israel, that allowed this to happen. But we have to do it in a way that avoids broader regional conflict in the Middle East. That does not advance American interests. $3 trillion spent in Iraq and Afghanistan. To what end? The Taliban is still in charge in Afghanistan 20 years later. Frankly, a hostile anti-American regime in Iraq that's vulnerable to Iranian incursion. That didn't advance American interests, and we have to own up to that. And there are many in the Republican Party. Some of you may have seen an interview a few nights ago with Hannity. It was a disaster from, in terms of the lack of clarity in the neocon wing of the Republican Party that fails to admit those errors of the past that we have to learn from. So I think we've made our worst decisions in the past when we've responded emotionally to military crises or to crises of other kinds. We have to respond rationally, cool-headedly, and ask what advances the American interest. And then the one point I will make is yesterday I was at Eagle Pass in Texas on the southern border. Last Saturday, exactly a week ago from right now, I was in Pittsburgh on your northern border in New Hampshire, taking a look at the wide open border with Canada. The number one lesson we have to take away in the U.S. is if that can happen in Israel, that can happen right here at home in the United States of America. And my top job as your commander-in-chief when it comes to our national defense is to defend our own homeland against that border invasion, against cyber attacks, super EMP attacks, missile attacks, space-based attacks that we're vulnerable to in the United States. We have an establishment in both parties in the last 25 years that has left us vulnerable, fighting in other parts of the world but failing to defend our own homeland. And that's my job as your next president, while honoring our relationships with our allies. And I think that's the kind of rational, non-emotional, cool-headed approach we're going to need in the next commander-in-chief, and that's the way I'm going to lead as your next president. We'll go right behind you. Thank you.
My name is Jim Rickers. I live in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. My question is, immediately after the Russian special military operation in Ukraine, the United States froze all Russian assets they could find in the banking system. Now a Republican member of Congress has proposed going a step further and actually confiscating the assets and putting them to whatever use we want. For example, the U.S. could take the Russian money and pay ourselves back for what we gave to Ukraine. My question is, how do you feel about crossing that? What's your view on crossing that line between freezing and confiscation?
It's a great question. What's your name?
Jim Rickers.
Jim, thank you for asking. I mean, that's why I love New Hampshire. I mean, these are questions in the interstices, but they matter. So I think there's a stronger case for using the financial system to exact reparations in the case of China, which unleashed hell on the world with a man-made virus that was leaked that killed hundreds of thousands of Americans and people around the world and cost this economy billions upon billions by way of understatement. So that's, if we're going to talk about a case of using financial levers to hold another country accountable, that's the one that's high on my list. But I think that the right way we deal with Russia, in my view, is very different from the rest of the field in both parties on this. Is that, do I trust Vladimir Putin? No, I do not. But did Nixon trust Mao in 1972? No, he did not. But we did what we needed to do. We pulled Mao Zedong, in the old communist China, out of the USSR because the USSR was our top threat. Well, today, communist China is our top threat. And I worry our policies are driving Russia further into China's arms when the Russia-China alliance today represents the single greatest threat that we face as Americans. So what does that mean we need to do? I actually think we live in a moment where we could reopen some of those relations with Russia. I think it was wrong, bad idea for us to bomb or be responsible for allowing the bombing of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. It's basically all but certain that the United States was aware of it, if not directly involved in it. That was a mistake. Pull Russia out of China's hands. Do I trust Putin? No, but I trust him to follow his self-interest, just as he can trust us to follow ours. And that actually weakens China. China's top bet right now is that if they invade Taiwan, the U.S. won't want to go to war with two different allied nuclear superpowers at the same time. But if Russia's no longer in China's camp, then Xi Jinping is going to have to think twice. So yes, I think we live in a moment where it's going to take somebody who thinks outside of the traditional box to take us off the path to World War III that I worry that we are slowly on already. We are too complacent right now. I think we face a risk of major conflict, an era of the Russia-China alliance, other hostile powers to the United States, of major conflict. And my foreign policy is really simple. Avoid World War III, declare economic independence from China, and protect this homeland right here in the United States of America. Those are my top three priorities. Everything else pales in comparison. Thank you for that question. I appreciate it. Thank you. We'll come to this side and we'll go back and forth between these sides. Come to this gentleman right here.
Vivek, nice to meet you.
It's good to see you.
Thanks.
What's your name?
Neil from Hampton Falls. Quick question. It's current about the Speaker of the House. And a couple weeks ago, Matt Gaetz and coalition effectively ousted Kevin McCarthy. My question is, what are your views on the reasons why he was voted out?
So I have a benefit here of not coming from that world of DC partisan horse trading and personality-driven vengeances back and forth. Let's just take a step back. Sometimes in the Republican Party, we obsess a little bit too much over the question of who. Kevin McCarthy or somebody else. Steve Scalise or somebody else. Ronna McDaniel or somebody else. And for those of you who don't know who that is, don't worry about it. Doesn't matter. I mean, Donald Trump or somebody else, right? Forget the question of the who for a second. Let's talk about the what and the why. What do we stand for? And why do we stand for it? Right? What I see, what we should be talking about right now, the $33 trillion national debt that our next generation is going to bear on their shoulders unless we do something about it. There were negotiations led by McCarthy and others to raise the debt ceiling. Well, to what end? We still have a $33 trillion national debt. Nobody's talked about how we deal with that. The border crisis of historic proportions. I was at Eagle Pass yesterday watching people literally just pour over into this country. I've never seen in my life a more organized, let alone government-organized process for violating the law at such a large scale. A dependence on China, our enemy, for our modern way of life that continues to grow by the day. An economy that's flailing we haven't seen since the Carter era. So yes, I want to talk about the what and the why. Tell me about what our plan is to address the crises that we face. And then the question of the who becomes much more obvious. What do we stand for? Why do we stand for it? That's what I want us talking about. And part of the reason you see this conflict pop up in the Republican Party ever so often, which will show up in the form of some personality conflict, and the media and everything being what it is loves to fixate on those, is there symptoms of a deeper loss of direction and purpose in the Republican Party itself. Right now, I worry the Republican Party has become a hollowed-out husk of a party in search of an agenda. So I'm not engaged in the personality-driven bickering. I could care less for it. I don't think it advances our goals. I want to focus on the what and the why, and then we can pick which person we put in the responsibility of the nanny to shepherd, a couple hundred people in Congress. That's the less important question than the substance of it itself. And so the good news in all of that is sometimes in chaos, there can actually be opportunity. And so I hope if we use this as an opportunity, and I'm trying to do my part to help lead this way, if we use this chaos to actually say, we don't have a speaker, who's it going to be? Well, maybe we'll just talk about what we stand for and why we stand for it and use that as our litmus test to pick the right speaker. Then we will be stronger on the other side for it. So that's the kind of way I approach this and lead with this issue. Thanks a lot. I appreciate that question. Thank you. Thank you. We'll come to this gentleman in the front here.
Hi, I'm Sriram from New Jersey. I do see the president of a country as a CEO of the country. With that said, someone having a high level of empathy. So with the financial distress that is lurking, I'm curious to know what your thoughts are to balance that with all the government programs that needs to go on to really respect the empathy that's required.
Great question. Thank you. So the good news is, I think we live in a moment where those aren't trade-offs. They go together. Some of the financial distress comes from spending government money we don't have. Well, one of my policies as U.S. president is we will stop using our taxpayer money to pay people to do the exact opposite of what is best for them. Right now, we pay single mothers in inner cities. I've been to the south side of Chicago and elsewhere. Single mothers who get more money not to have a man in the house they're married to than to have a man in the house who they're married to. When, in fact, the nuclear family is inherently good. 25% fatherlessness rate in this country. Yes, we ought to have empathy for kids who grow up in those households who are 8 times more likely to end up in prison, 10 times more likely to end up in poverty, over 10 times less likely to graduate from high school or enter and get a college degree. But we're using our government money to do it. We're using our government money to pay people more not to go to work than to go to work. Not only is that leaving people economically worse off, that's driving a mental health epidemic of depression and anxiety in Gen Z and young Americans who are responding to bad government incentives. So I could go straight down the list. I've been to Kensington in the inner city of Philadelphia. You know what happens there? The aid programs, including funded by the government, hand out crack pipes and needles as a form of aid. We need to stop, even last night at the border, actually, just to bring this up, happened yesterday. I watched a father and a daughter crossing that Rio Grande. The U.S. Coast Guard brought them over. I saw the whole thing. The daughter was there. She's 12 years old. The father was in shock from cold, like literally physical shock. He had to be hospitalized. She ended up under a bridge. We saw over the course of the couple hours there the whole story play out. We asked her in Spanish, "Why are you here?" She said, "In search for opportunity, in search for a better life." 12-year-old girl from Honduras. That is not compassion. That is cruelty. And so I think we live in a moment where this isn't a trade-off between bringing the CEO mindset to the White House, which I do. Zero-based budgeting on down. Address our national debt crisis. Grow our economy. Do it without apology. But we live in a moment where that government money from the Department of Education, which we talked about earlier, on down, isn't even serving the very people it was supposed to help. So yes, I think it takes a CEO, but I think it takes a CEO who understands with conviction that it's not a trade-off versus who's going to suffer as a consequence of the decisions. What decisions can we first make that are going to help everybody lift them up from economic struggle, from poverty in many cases as well? And I do think that that question, the part about young people who are often baited by government aid to even opt out of the workforce. We're seeing that spread across the country. What's the real crisis in the United States of America today? It's even deeper than our economy. I can tell you this, speaking as a member of my generation, we are starved for purpose, and meaning and identity at a time in our national history when the things that used to fill that void, faith, patriotism, hard work, family, these things have disappeared. And that leaves a black hole in our hearts. And when you have a black hole that runs that deep, that is when the poison fills the void. It almost doesn't matter what the poison is, actually. Even we in our party sometimes obsess over it too much. Wokeism, transgenderism, climatism, COVIDism, globalism, depression, anxiety, fentanyl, suicide. These are symptoms of a deeper void of purpose and meaning. For a long time, we in our party, we have been running from something. Now is our moment to actually start running to something, to our vision of what it means to be an American. And I think our government has played a role in creating that vacuum by paying people in the name of helping them to actually leave them, the very recipients of that so-called aid or help, worse off than they otherwise would have been, not only economically, but even in a deeper sense. And one of my jobs as U.S. president, half the job of a U.S. president is policy, no doubt about it. And I'm glad we're talking a lot about policy today. For a U.S. senator or congressman, that's almost 100% of the job. But for the U.S. president, it's my belief that at least half the job is reviving a national character that we lack today. That's what Reagan said in '89 when he left office. Of all the things he could have picked, bringing us to the near end of the Cold War, getting us out of stagflation in the Carter era, growing the economy. He didn't say any of that. When he left office in his farewell speech, the thing he talked about was being proud of reviving a national character that we lacked when he first took office in '81. I think a lot about not what I want to tell you in my inauguration speech in January 2025. That's not the destination. That is the start line. The destination for me in this journey is January 2033. What do I want to tell you that we actually did? That's the way, when a CEO in the White House, we think about the destination. I want to tell you we shut down much of the administrative state, 75% headcount reduction in the number of federal employees. We drill, we frack, we burn coal, we embrace nuclear energy, we roll back those regulations. We put people back to work by no longer paying them more to stay at home than to go to work. That we declared economic independence from China. We did it while keeping us out of World War III. Most importantly of all, though, I want to tell you that we revived national pride in our two sons and their generation. They won't even be in high school when we leave the White House in January 2033 after 2 terms. But that's what I want to tell you. And yes, I think you're right. That will take not just the technical CEO. It's important, but it's not the entire job. That's half the job through the policy. The other half is answering what it means to be an American today. If you ask most people my age that question, what does it mean to be an American? You get a blank stare in response. It's like a deer in the headlights. That is the vacuum. That's the void. And I think the most important job of the next president is to decisively answer that question, deliver a vision of our national identity that runs so deep that it dilutes the poison to irrelevance. That's actually how we're going to win, and that's the standard I want you all to hold me to if you all put us in that office. Thank you very much, Ron. I appreciate it.
We're going to have time, real quick. Democracy speeds things up. We're going to have time for one more question.
Oh, my goodness. Okay,
and
we're running out of time.
So it's up to you.
Oh, my goodness.
I know you were looking around here.
This gentleman in the back is a young man. He's had his hand up for a while, so give a young person the
Mr. Ramaswamy, I'm a junior at the Phillips Exeter Academy nearby. We recently just saw Judge Dougherty agree with the attorney generals of Missouri and Louisiana that the Biden administration colluded with Twitter and other big tech to silence reports of Hunter's laptop like the New York Post, and continued throughout his administration to silence conservatives on social media. How, as president, would you confront big tech and ensure that the First Amendment is protected on all platforms?
First of all, I want to say I'm proud of a 16-year-old. How old are you, 16? 17? really in the weeds here. And then that one hits close to home for me because that particular case and the ruling was argued in part drawing on a legal theory that this is just a coincidence. I happen to have played a small role in authoring 3 years ago on the pages of the Wall Street Journal with a former law professor of mine. And we made an argument at the time that was dismissed widely. People laughed at it as a conspiracy theory. Now it's in the mainstream of our appellate court system, which I'm proud of, which said this, right? The traditional wisdom is that the First Amendment, y'all know the First Amendment, enshrines freedom of religion, free expression, that's freedom of speech and otherwise, freedom of assembly and so on. That the First Amendment only applies to the government, but that companies are free to silence speech as they see fit. Well, hold on there a second. That's true if the companies are actually behaving as companies. But it turns out, and this was evident in January of 2021 when I co-wrote that piece that these cases are now drawing on, turns out if the government is threatening companies to do something through the back door that the government couldn't do through the front door, then the Supreme Court has long held that those companies are still bound by the First Amendment. There's a case, actually, the Bantam Books case. It dates about 40, 50 years ago. There's a bookstore owner who wanted to sell a book. The prosecutor and the local government didn't like the book. They said, take it down. He refused to. They then threatened him and said, we're going to bring some case against you on an unrelated matter. Well, then the bookstore owner, I don't want to deal with that. He takes the book down. A customer wants to buy the book. He sues. They said, oh, it's just a private company. The Supreme Court said, not so fast. That was the government threatening the private company, in that case, the bookstore owner. Today, it's Facebook or Google, to do something through the back door the government couldn't do directly. Because this is New Hampshire, I'm going into a layer of depth I wouldn't usually go into here. Same thing with incentives. If the government gives you a carrot to do something the government couldn't do directly, that's state action in disguise. So there's a case involving the railroads. During the war on drugs, the government wanted to fight drugs, and they said, we want to search and seize drugs on passengers. Well, the government can't do that directly because we have this pesky little thing in the United States called the Fourth Amendment. I think it's a good thing. What the government did is they passed a law that said that the railroad employees or operators would not be liable for being sued by passengers or by employees if the railroad chose to search them. It's not the government doing it, it's just a private company doing it. The Supreme Court said not so fast. If it's state action in disguise, that you gave those companies an incentive purposely to do something the government couldn't do, the Constitution still applies. Well, what do we have now? Section 230, which tells tech companies, it's a special law that gives tech companies special liability immunity from being sued for taking down constitutionally protected content. So one of the things I've learned in my short time in this political world is sometimes you got to make things a rhyme to make them stick. So what we say is, if it is state action in disguise, then the Constitution still applies. If the government is threatening these companies and giving them carrots and sticks to do its dirty work through the back door, then these companies are and ought to be bound by the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. And this is, I think, if we're closing on this question, maybe I'll wrap it this way, which is to say that we live in a complicated time. The threats to liberty aren't what they were back in 1980. I believe the building we're in, I was told before I walked in here, was one where Abraham Lincoln famously spoke about 160 years ago. Lincoln said it at the height of the Civil War, the dogmas of a quiet past are inadequate to the stormy present. I say the dogmas of 1980, even in our conservative movement, are inadequate to address the unique challenges that we face in the year 2023. Reagan didn't face, he faced just big government, but didn't face the collusion of big government and big business to together do what neither could do alone. And the real irony in all of this is, the reason Silicon Valley's doing it is that the old version of break up big tech used to come from the left. So what they basically said is, hey, we'll censor hate speech and misinformation as you define it, but we won't do it for free. We want the left to now look the other way when it comes to leaving our monopoly power intact. just like Wall Street did it on the back of the 2008 financial crisis. So these are complex threats we face today. And I believe we require a commander-in-chief who deeply understands the unique nature of those threats we face today. It won't work. We're just going to scratch the surface and get nowhere if you have a super PAC paid politician puppet who reads slogans served up to them on a teleprompter to pretend to be a Republican instead of a Democrat, and the same old game moves on. No, the system isn't changing. The broken, corrupt super PAC system, the people that send you the advertisements you see here in New Hampshire, this depends on whether you can cut through that. And I trust you guys here. Our process depends on it. You all go first in the reason to tell the difference between somebody who's serving you up poll-tested slogans and somebody who has a deep first personal understanding of the threats we face and how we're going to overcome them. And what I will say is, how old are you, man? You're 16, right? You look like you're about 16. That's about right. So I'm proud of you for coming out here on a Saturday morning and asking this question. You're young. But what I will say is, our nation is actually a little young. We don't have to be that nation in decline. We don't have to be ancient Rome at the end of the Roman Empire, as we're taught to believe. I think we are really just a little young, going through our own version of adolescence, figuring out who we're really going to be when we grow up. And when you view it that way, at least for me, it makes sense again. You go through your adolescence, you go through that identity crisis. You lose your way a little bit. You lose your self-confidence. You make some mistakes. I did when I was your age. Most of us probably did. But we are stronger for it when we get to our adulthood on the other side. So, no, I don't think we have to be that nation in decline. I think we are still yet a nation in our ascent. Maybe the early stages of our ascent. Try it this way. Maybe we're not even at base camp. On our way to that shining city on a hill, that country where no matter who you are, or where your parents came from, or what your skin color is, or how long your last name is in some of our cases, that you get ahead in this country with your own hard work, your own commitment, your own dedication, and that you know what? You are free to speak your mind at every step of the way. I was looking for the early question. She might have left. But every one of us, you are free to speak your mind at every step of the way. That is the American dream. That is what we are running to. And that is what we together will revive to save our great country. Thank you for coming out this morning. God bless you. God bless our United States. Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it.
We want to thank everyone here in Exeter, in New Hampshire, and we also want to thank you all watching at home. Thank you very much.